All right, so let's unpack this. You reached out recently and sent us this just massive stack of analyst notes.
Oh, yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, it was covering the week of August 10th through the 16th, 2026,
Right.
which the quants and the researchers are apparently just calling W34.
W34, exact.
And you mentioned you were trying to figure out how these, seemingly scattered macro trends are actually going to impact your portfolio.
Right, your broader strategic planning, yeah.
Yeah. So we designed this deep dive specifically for you to kind of connect the dots across all this data. And to start, I want you to imagine playing a massive online video game.
Okay.
Like an incredibly complex one. And usually things like server lag or, the time it takes the game to render the graphics, those are just annoying glitches.
Well, you just can't deal with them.
Exactly. They exist in the background, you ignore them, you play through the stutter, and you just focus on the main quest.
Yeah.
But then one day, the developers push an update, and suddenly that server lag is a core gameplay mechanic.
Oh, wow. Yeah, your character's survival actually depends on how well you calculate that delay. The glitch didn't get patched out. It got, integrated into the rules of the world.
Which is, honestly, that perfectly encapsulates the structural shift that's jumping out of these W34 reports.
Okay, how so?
Well, if we look at the raw news from that mid-August week, whether it's tech investments or shipping lane disputes or central bank meetings, it is incredibly easy to misinterpret the friction as a series of random, isolated crises.
Yeah, just bad news popping up everywhere.
Exactly. And there is a temptation to buy into this dramatic narrative of some looming global collapse.
Right, the sky is falling.
But the data doesn't actually support a collapse.
It doesn't.
No, the system is just adapting to a new reality. We are watching things that used to be external, peripheral constraints.
Like what?
Like local community pushback against a construction site or physical limits on ocean freight or even hyper-local inflation.
Okay.
We're watching those things move directly into the foreground. So they are no longer just operational roadblocks that a CEO or a policymaker can just brush aside if they throw enough capital at it.
Exactly. They are mutating into strict conditions of entry.
Okay, so back to the game analogy. You can't even log in unless you prove you've accounted for the lag.
That's it. You have to account for it. And we are going to examine three massive, seemingly disconnected systems today to demonstrate how this mutation is actually playing out.
Okay, what are the three?
We're looking at AI infrastructure, the Strait of Hormuz in global shipping, and the overarching operating system of global monetary policy.
Wow, okay. That is a wide net.
It is, but across all three, the exact same pipeline is forming.
Vicious.
Constraints are moving from being exposed to being relevant to decision makers to becoming absolute conditions for participation.
Okay, let's start with AI then, because the sheer scale of the numbers hitting the wire during W34 is just staggering.
It really is.
Like on August 10th, NVIDIA announced this partnership with a consortium of, basically the biggest financial players on the planet.
Yeah, the heavy hitters.
Right, we're talking Apollo, BlackRock, Blackstone, Brookfield, Goldman Sachs, KKR.
It is massive.
And the stated goal is to mobilize over $500 billion in third-party capital, specifically for AI infrastructure.
Right.
But reading through the lines of this report, this isn't just a tech sector stock bump, is it?
Not at all. No, this announcement represents a fundamental redefinition of what AI actually is to the global financial system.
Okay, explain that.
Well, we need to stop thinking about this in terms of, just selling more GPUs or expanding a software company's cloud capacity.
Right, the typical Silicon Valley stuff.
Yeah. The physical computing power, the compute itself, has transitioned into a long-term, hard infrastructure asset.
Hard infrastructure.
Yes. It is absorbing capital in the exact same way a nation might fund a multi-state highway system.
Or like a massive hydroelectric dam or something.
Exactly. It's the GPUs, the concrete for the data centers, the transmission lines for the power grid, the raw acreage of land.
All of it.
All of it is being bundled into one massive, decades-long financial structure.
Okay, but hang on. I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, just to make sure we are pinpointing the actual shift.
Sure.
It's not like data centers just suddenly started getting thirsty in August 2026, right?
No, of course not.
Servers have always needed massive amounts of cooling water, electricity, land. These physical limits have always been there. So what actually flipped during W34?
You're right. The physical needs were always there.
Hmm.
But the financial treatment of those needs has completely inverted.
Okay, what do you mean by inverted?
Historically, during the tech boom, things like water access or local permitting, they were treated as external downstream problems.
Like a headache for later.
Exactly. A tech giant would commit the capital, start the project, and then leave the local zoning disputes or the power grid upgrades as an operational problem for the project manager to solve.
Right, figure it out after the fact.
After the foundation's already poured, basically.
Mhm.
But what this $500 billion mobilization shows is that Wall Street and these mega investors are now internalizing those physical realities before a single dollar moves.
So a local zoning board meeting in, I don't know, a rural town in the Midwest is suddenly a highly weighted variable in a Goldman Sachs risk model.
Exactly that. The noise the cooling fans will make, the strain on the municipal water supply, the likelihood of a local protest.
They're pricing that in.
Yes, these are being pulled forward and calculated as core financial and credit risks.
Wow.
And this highlights the central tension of the AI build-out, which the analysts in the report are calling a velocity mismatch.
A velocity mismatch. Okay, you mean between the speed of the money and the speed of the concrete.
In essence, yes. Consider the life cycle of AI demand. Software models, market expectations, algorithmic breakthroughs, they move at hyperspeed.
Right, they evolve in a matter of days or months.
But the physical infrastructure required to actually run those models, upgrading a regional power grid, acquiring contiguous land, securing environmental permits, physically pouring the foundation.
That moves incredibly slowly.
Glacially. We are talking years, sometimes decades, just to get a substation approved.
Which brings up a really crucial question about how these banks are operating.
Okay.
If a megafund calculates the financial risk of a town rejecting a data center, does that actually give them any real control over the town? I mean, is this physical constraint just visible and calculable now, or is it actually controllable by the capital?
That distinction cuts right to the heart of the W34 report.
Right.
The constraint is highly visible, and it is now calculable.
Yeah.
But it is emphatically not controllable.
Not controllable.
No. Just because a private equity firm puts a 3% risk premium on local community pushback doesn't mean they can magically force a community to accept a massive, noisy, water-hungry facility.
Right. Financial gravity does not override physical reality.
Exactly. The spreadsheet can't force the town council to vote yes, no matter how many zeros are on it.
Yeah.
And because it's fundamentally uncontrollable, we are witnessing a phenomenon that researchers are labeling the time lock effect.
Time lock effect.
Yeah. Fast-moving expectations in the AI boom are so enormous that investors are frantically trying to lock up future physical resources today.
Okay, so that $500 billion is being committed far faster than the physical power grids can actually adapt to receive it?
Yes. The expectations of today are essentially locking in the physical constraints of tomorrow.
Got it. So to put it in perspective for our listener, it's like everyone is rushing to reserve a VIP table at a restaurant that hasn't even been built yet.
Right.
And the architect hasn't even figured out if there's enough water pressure on the street to run the kitchen's dishwashers.
That is a great way to put it.
The risk isn't that the restaurant won't be popular. The risk is that the physical reality of the street's plumbing will prevent it from ever opening.
And you've already tied up a fortune in the reservation.
Right.
That is a perfect translation of the dynamic. Capital is trying to brute force its way through a physical bottleneck, and they're discovering that you can't bribe a copper shortage.
You can't bribe a copper shortage. I love that, which actually provides a pretty seamless transition to the second system in our stack of sources.
The shipping lanes.
Yeah, because this illusion that financial or political power equates to physical control is breaking down everywhere. We don't even have to look at landlocked data centers to see it. We can just look out on the water.
Right.
The W34 report points heavily to the Strait of Hormuz during this exact same week.
Yeah, the situation in global shipping perfectly mirrors the AI infrastructure problem. It's just operating in a totally different domain.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, for a long time, the global market and political analysts looked at strategic waterways, like Hormuz, through a very rigid binary lens.
Meaning?
Meaning, is the strait open or is it closed?
Right. The traditional view is that if diplomats meet in a room, they shake hands, and they sign a piece of paper technically opening the strait, the problem is solved.
That's the assumption.
The headline goes out, the market rallies, and we just assume trade resumes. But if politicians reach an agreement, what exactly has not changed yet on the actual water?
What hasn't changed is the physical and commercial reality of moving a $100 million asset through a historically high-risk zone.
Right.
There is a massive and often misunderstood gap between institutional or political connectivity and actual physical connectivity.
Right, because a political decree from a government does not automatically move a cargo ship.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think of a good way to visualize this. It's almost like holding a valid front row ticket to a music festival,
Okay.
but the only access road is completely flooded.
Yeah.
And your auto insurance company explicitly states they will void your policy if you attempt to drive through water.
Oh, that's good.
Right. So the political door is completely open. The venue is telling you to come on in.
But the physical reality requires a massive stack of commercial conditions to be met first before you can actually attend.
Exactly. So what are those conditions for a ship in Hormuz?
It's a whole stack of them. For physical shipping flows to actually recover in a contested waterway, multiple, partially uncontrolled domains have to align simultaneously.
Uncontrolled domains.
Right. It is not enough for a politician to say the water is safe.
Okay. What else do you need?
First, you need the security guarantees from naval escorts to actually hold up.
Okay.
Then, you need marine insurance syndicates, which are usually sitting in offices in London, to be willing to underwrite the voyage.
And they usually demand what? Exorbitant war risk premium.
Exactly. Huge premiums. Then, you need the ship owners themselves to look at their own internal risk assessments and agree to put their crew and their ship in potential danger.
Which they might just refuse to do.
Right. And finally, you need the underlying commercial cargo contracts to be lucrative enough to justify all those massive added expenses we just listed.
So the diplomat only controls step one.
Yeah.
They have absolutely zero control over the insurance underwriter, the ship captain, or the commodities trader.
None at all.
Yeah.
Which means we have to fundamentally rethink how we view global trade routes. The W34 data makes it very clear. It's no longer a question of absolute closure versus absolute openness.
So what is it?
The new paradigm is selective connectivity.
Okay. Break down selective connectivity for me. Does that mean the strait is technically open, but only for certain players?
Yes, exactly. The waterway might be politically open to the world, but in reality, only the players who can satisfy these complex new conditions can use it.
Ah.
Only the shipping conglomerates that can absorb those sky-high insurance premiums, that can afford private security apparatuses, and that have the deep pockets to secure a ship owner's trust, can actually connect their supply chains through that route.
So the constraint, the danger in the strait, it didn't disappear just because a treaty was signed or an announcement was made.
Right.
The constraint morphed into a condition of entry.
Precisely.
The game is still playable, but the entry fee just went astronomically high, and you basically have to pass a commercial background check to even log in.
And that transition from an open global system where essentially anyone with basic capital can connect to a conditional system where only those who meet strict, localized criteria can participate.
Yeah.
That is the defining feature of W34.
Wow. Okay, now let's tie this all together by looking at the financial operating system that runs beneath all of this.
Beneath the AI data centers and the cargo ships.
Right, because we are seeing this exact concept of selective conditions hard-coding itself into global monetary policy too, aren't we?
We are. The macroeconomic layer is where this gets truly fascinating.
The report spends a lot of time contrasting the United States and Japan during this exact mid-August window.
It does. We have one overarching global financial system, right? Essentially a single operating system that every major economy is plugged into.
Right, the global market.
But the experiences within that unified system are diverging wildly based on local physical realities.
Yeah, the divergence in the W34 report is striking. I mean, during that week, the United States was experiencing cooling inflation. The intense pressure for further central bank interest rate hikes was easing up, and they were looking at a trajectory of, well, loosening monetary policy.
Exactly.
But at the exact same time, Japan was dealing with a completely different, almost opposing reality.
Completely different.
They were battling a historically weak yen, massive import price pressures, and their central bank was remaining very conscious of the need to tighten monetary policy.
Which goes against how we usually think about this. We usually operate under the assumption that global finance moves in a single, unified direction.
Right, the old adage that when the U.S. snoozes, the world catches a cold.
Exactly. We expect a rising tide to lift all boats, or a global recession to sink them all uniformly.
But W34 challenges that assumption deeply.
Very deeply.
So what are the actual mechanics here? How can two of the largest economies in the world be plugged into the exact same global financial system, but find themselves on completely divergent policy trajectories?
To understand the mechanics, we have to look back at the physical constraints we just discussed in the shipping and energy sectors.
Okay, how so?
The global financial system hasn't broken apart. It hasn't collapsed into separate, isolated networks. Instead, local constraints are creating branching time frames within the same operating system.
Branching timeframes. Oh, like different save files in our video game where players are experiencing different storylines simultaneously.
That's a great way to look at it. Think about why Japan and the U.S. are diverging. Japan is heavily dependent on imported energy and raw material.
Right, they are an island nation.
Exactly. When global shipping constraints, like those selective connectivity issues we just talked about in the Strait of Hormuz, drive up the cost of freight and insurance.
Japan feels it immediately.
Yes, Japan imports that inflation directly. Their physical constraint dictates their monetary reality, forcing them to consider tightening to protect the yen.
Okay, and the U.S.?
The U.S. is comparatively more energy independent. They aren't held hostage by that exact same physical constraint to the same degree,
Right.
which allows their internal inflation to cool, completely separate from Japan's experience.
Right. So the overarching global system is actually holding itself together precisely by allowing these local conditions to dictate the local reality.
Yes.
Because if the system tried to force a one-size-fits-all monetary policy across both the U.S. and Japan, the friction between the financial mandate and the physical reality would cause the whole thing to snap.
Exactly. The system is accommodating multiple realities at once. It is a highly sophisticated adaptation.
Okay, if we zoom out and synthesize this entire W34 report, I mean, across the hundreds of billions pouring into AI data centers, the insurance underwriters guarding the Strait of Hormuz, and the branching timelines of global central banks.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is. But we are watching a very specific life cycle play out across all of them. The analysts basically frame it as a pipeline that constraints move through.
Right.
And the first stage is simply exposure.
Yes. Exposure is the realization phase. It's the moment the market realizes the local Midwestern power grid mathematically cannot handle a new AI facility.
Or the realization that a shipping lane remains physically dangerous despite a signed political agreement.
Right. The glitch is noticed.
Okay, so the glitch is noticed, then it moves to the second stage, decision relevance.
Right.
This is when the constraint actually enters the spreadsheet.
Yeah, the investment banks start actively calculating the risk of a town council voting no.
Or the marine syndicates calculate the exact cost of a war risk premium.
Exactly. The physical problem becomes a financial variable.
Got it. And finally, it reaches the third stage, conditionality.
Conditionality is the enforcement phase.
Enforcement.
Meaning, if you don't solve this variable, if you don't meet this specific physical condition, you do not get to participate.
Period.
Period.
Yeah.
The data center project is dead on arrival. The cargo ship does not sail.
But this brings up a massive question for you, and honestly, a bit of pushback against how the market seems to be handling all this.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are taking these incredibly messy, slow-moving physical problems, community, anger, grid capacity, localized inflation, and we are turning them into neat little variables we can just put a price tag on. But if a constraint becomes calculable and we price it into the model, does that actually make it controllable? I mean, does making a problem expensive actually make the problem go away?
Oh, that is perhaps the most crucial realization our listener can take away from this entire briefing.
Okay.
Pricing a constraint does not make the system instantly sustainable.
It doesn't.
No. Putting a price tag on a physical bottleneck doesn't erase the bottleneck. It merely reallocates who bears the burden of the friction.
Let's dig into that reallocation. Where does the burden actually go? Because it doesn't just vanish into the ether, obviously.
Obviously not. Let's track the burden in the AI example.
Okay.
If electricity generation is physically constrained in a region, but a massive new AI facility gets built anyway because a tech consortium can afford to pay a premium for the power.
Right. They just outbid everyone.
Right. The constraint of limited electricity didn't vanish. The cost just shifts.
To who?
It shifts to the local residents and small businesses in the form of higher municipal electricity bills.
Oh, wow.
Or, if contiguous land is scarce, the tech giant, buying it up at a massive premium, doesn't magically create more land.
It just causes local commercial and residential property values to spike.
Exactly. Pricing out the people who already live there.
And the exact same mechanism applies to the shipping lanes, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly the same.
Because the physical danger in the strait doesn't go away just because an underwriter priced it in London.
Not at all.
The insurance premium goes through the roof, which means the cost to charter the ship goes up, which means the cost of the raw materials inside the ship goes up.
Yeah.
And eventually that burden lands right on the consumer who's just paying more for a flat screen TV or a gallon of gas.
Exactly. The price tag just tumbled down the supply chain until it hit someone who couldn't pass it on.
That makes total sense.
The global system is incredibly efficient at translating physical constraints into financial costs. But we must absolutely not confuse financial translation with physical resolution. So as you look at the landscape in the coming weeks and months, do not look for absolute resolutions. You aren't going to see a headline declaring, global AI power problem solved, or shipping lanes 100% secure forever.
Right, because we aren't living in a binary world of broken or fixed.
Right. Instead, you need to watch how these stubborn physical factors evolve into pricing structures, complex contracting requirements, and permission structures.
The condition.
The conditions. The global economy isn't halting, it's transitioning. We're moving from a historical era where anyone with capital can connect to a new era where only those who meet the strict, localized physical conditions can connect.
Wow. It really all comes back to that video game update. The server lag isn't a glitch to be patched anymore. It is now a core gameplay mechanic you have to build your entire strategy around.
Exactly.
We aren't witnessing a collapse. We are just witnessing the immense grinding friction of a hyperfast, globally connected operating system trying its absolute best to ingest the messy, stubborn, incredibly slow-moving realities of the physical world.
And that friction is exactly where the future of investment and strategy is being decided right now. The players who understand that these peripheral constraints are now mandatory conditions, well, they'll be the ones who can actually navigate this new landscape.
It's really a fundamental shift in how you have to read the morning news. I mean, every seemingly isolated headline about a local zoning dispute over water rights, or a sudden spike in maritime insurance premiums, or a surprising inflation report out of Tokyo.
Yeah.
It's actually a story about the global operating system adapting to a physical limit.
It forces decision makers to stop asking, is the system growing? And start asking a much more important question.
Which is?
Who is ultimately absorbing the cost of that growth?
Which leaves us with a lot of strategic implications to digest. And rather than wrap this up with a neat, definitive conclusion, we want to leave you with 3 specific analytical questions from the W34 report to mull over as you review your own portfolio this week.
Okay, question 1. Which constraints in your industry that are still considered peripheral today might become mandatory decision variables tomorrow?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And question 2, if a physical constraint becomes financially calculable, does that actually make it controllable for your business?
And question 3, what happens to the market when fast-moving expectations commit capital far faster than slow-moving physical systems can adapt?
And I'll add one final fresh thought to the mix, just kind of building on everything we've just discussed today.
Okay.
If physical constraints like power, water, and safe passage are becoming the ultimate barriers to entry, what happens when nations begin actively weaponizing these constraints?
Oh, wow.
Right. Because we've spent this entire time looking at corporate risk and market adaptation. But what happens when a state actor decides to intentionally bottleneck the copper or the water or the maritime choke points needed for these exact systems to function? Because if capital can't control physical reality, then whoever controls the physical reality controls the capital. The glitch didn't get fixed, it got integrated. So keep your eyes open and keep questioning the systems around you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.